Jackie is a professor at CWU. She teaches painting, drawing, art history, and also teaches painting and drawing. And do you also do like three-dimensional work at Gallery One?
Yeah, yep, I've done a little bit of everything over at Gallery One.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's go ahead and look at your art. Tell us about this. Is this a series that you did?
Yeah, this was kind of where I got my start with thinking about memory and looking at like surreal art and trying to find a reaction from the paint doing what it was going to do, and then figuring out how I was going to respond to it. I learned this practice in my undergrad actually from one of my professors, and then I kind of took it and pushed it and manipulated it a little bit more.
Cool. And what can you tell us a little bit about that technique? Are you pouring or using?
Yeah, so I actually pour the paint. I kind of like the idea that there's no mark of the artist. There's no brush. There's no fingerprints. It's all action painting, I guess you could call it.
Cool.
And then with this one specifically, so while it's all wet and marbleizing and mixing, I, kind of react with other colors. And I actually tried something a little different with this one by putting water into it while it was still wet. So I like the reaction and that negative push and pull of the two really opposing materials. Once it dries, the water just evaporates, but it typically dries a lot slower depending on the environment, and it left these like little rivets in the oil paint. These are the same. They're actually on a different support. They're actually just on masonite. I particularly like the harder surface because you get an even pour with canvas. It typically sinks in the center. Both of these had use of water and then a little bit of manipulation after they had dried. Kind of figuring out what I wanted to do with them. Yeah, a couple more of the same.
Great. Were you always interested in kind of abstract art, or did that come to you later? I feel like that's something that a lot of people struggle with, kind of.
It actually came to me a lot later. It kind of snuck up on me, to be honest. I was really honed in on realism and really representational artwork. And then I started kind of letting go a little bit and letting it happen and do what it was going to do. And then trying to put my mark into it with that idea. And some were a little bit more informed, and others were a little bit more quickly reacted to. The one on the far left, the baby, is actually charcoal on oil. The center is oil and oil, and then the last one is soft pastels on oil.
Yeah.
I started adding sand in with the viscous paint, and this is a pretty typical Utah or southern Utah sand. Go and gather it, and then find ways to adhere it into the paint. And then again, I was using oil and water, and it was just these really, really gorgeous reactions that started to kind of take on this like weird false earth type to them.
Yeah, it almost looks like Earth from above, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or moon craters of some
Yeah,
kind.
exactly. Oh yeah, so more from this series.
Yeah, a couple detail shots because some of the reactions I could control and a lot of it I couldn't. And that's what I really enjoyed about it, especially when you get these really delicate little interactions like the red paint there peeking up underneath. It actually wasn't part of the original pour. It just started to crack underneath the pressure of the oil and water, and it made this lovely little fleshy part, which I absolutely adore.
Cool. Okay, this is totally different.
It is. It is. So this is actually a really interesting step. I decided that I had always really enjoyed stippling as a drawer, and I liked putting color with it. And I thought that if there's some way I can harness this really drippy, viscous paint, that I would. And I started using eyedroppers and doing these individual little drips with thinned oil paint. and just kind of let it become what it was going to be.
And how big
Looking
is
at, right, impressionism and some divisionism, deciding how I wanted to find my next step.
how big are the finished pieces?
Um, this one's about 24 by 24.
Cool.
Yeah.
And are you
They all range in different sizes. I actually started getting really big for a while.
very cool. Well, 24 by 24 is a good size. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not in comparison to this. This is 6 foot by 4 foot.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is, are you trying to kind of do a little more minimalist, or is this under?
These are just some in process pieces. So just the
Wow.
steps, because I'd have to let it dry, and I'd have to make sure I was stepping back from it. And in this case, I climb a ladder to look down on it without moving it to make sure it was looking like it was supposed to. And I rounded the corners of my canvas so that they would drip around, kind of creating a seamless look instead of a hard edge. And there's the finished product.
These are also quite big.
Yeah, yep. So they were refurbished doors that I built into and renovated to be able to work like this. Um, Still kind of playing with the eyedropper feel and playing with color, working large. I felt like that was the only way to work with the drips because I really couldn't get them to be a certain size. They came out pretty standard drop size.
Yeah.
So it worked well to go big because then I could layer more and it wasn't just like an even grid of drops. It became this like, layered look.
Cool. Now tell us about this. This is different too.
Yeah, this one's also a 6 foot by 4 foot canvas. Um, it's kind of pushing it more into the abstract feel. I started getting a little bit more advantageous with my decisions, and what originally started off as a loss of control with the eyedropper turned into a really interesting mark. And so I kept pushing it, and I kept instead of just focusing on one single drip, I let it become more. This is a delicate arch, and I found it had more tension by putting that little bit of a gap between it. And it started to remind me of the creation of man.
Right, right, right. That
Right,
little.
the two fingers coming together and giving a little bit of that directional force there.
Cool. I mean, this is a similar form to what you were doing before with the drip, but you're changing the style.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of just like those pores again. Again, I was trying to again remove the idea of the hand of the artist, but start to pull in some recognizable imagery, at least in color, and a little bit in form.
And are you just kind of drawn? I think you've told me this before, but you're kind of drawn to like railroad track.
I always have been drawn to railroads.
Yeah.
It's a imagery that I always revisit. Um, I think that there's some really beautiful connotation with railroads that we're all connected in a strange way. I grew up near railroad tracks, and so hearing the train whistle 4 in the morning was pretty normal. And my grandfather was also a really big fan of trains, and they became this really beautiful memory between the relationship we had and my relationship with home. I thought it was a fun place to revisit.
Now, are these landscapes kind of also pulling from Utah, or tell me
Yeah,
about?
absolutely. Yeah. So again, my work being about memory, I try to find that um, aspect of familiarity. And with a couple of these, they might just seem like very basic landscape looks, but the color palette and the shape and the form are very recognizable places to me. Like, I know exactly where these places are, um, even though, that at second, at first glance, they might not look like anything specific. But for me, they do. They hold a lot of information.
Great. And now, is this a like kind of a rocking horse, or your image is kind of cutting it off, so I can't totally see. But tell me what.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a rocking horse.
Okay.
Yeah. I decided to go with a look as like a child would look at the rocking horse. Again, kind of bringing that concept of nostalgia and memory. This is actually my rocking horse growing up, and now my godson uses it, and it's just again, just a really special thing. I was trying to pull away from location and more about specific objects, just to
And
kind of
both
break it up a little bit.
and both kind of inform memory too, so that works.
Yeah.
So now tell us about these.
So these are some more experimentation. The one in the center, the piano keys are actually done on paper, um, and gesso paper. It allowed me to work really big and quick. Um, and again, that idea of object. My sisters and I all grew up playing the piano. Although none of us really continue it, it brings a lot of memories, both good and bad, right? Of I don't want to go to piano lessons and things like that. But I thought it was an important aspect of my childhood. Um, the leaves are actually my backyard. Um, and I decided to start playing with the idea of forgotten memory in
Mm.
the two on the sides. The orange strip is actually just a glaze of oil paint, but it really breaks up the image and it starts to give it this like decay look, like
Yeah, I
maybe
really
you're
like.
you're looking through a lens almost. And the pelican is actually a dedication to my mother. Um, Pelicans are really interesting birds that they have known to harm themselves to allow their children to drink their blood if
Whoa.
there's not enough sustenance. And so this piece is actually called Sacrifice. And it's, again, I started pushing a lot of different things. I rendered a little bit more tightly. I poured paint. I used really thick impasto technique. And then I sanded it.
Okay, more kind of figurative, abstract.
Yeah, this was just a little bit of a change in direction. I been working with landscape and been working with object figures or something I always love to draw and to paint, and I wanted to bring in that non-representational abstract kind of look, while just giving a little hint of something. Some are obviously a little bit more specific than others. I broke it down to basic colors, um, just hue plus black and white. These are all poured, um, and use the eyedropper to kind of be able to control it a little bit. Lots and lots and lots of layers. But it was a nice, I mean, it was a departure, but it was fun and enjoyable to kind of break up the routine. Same stuff, right? Kind of, again, zooming in on the body to the point of um, that has lost recognition. I felt they also kind of had a landscape look to them as well.
For
So that
sure.
was really interesting,
Mm.
especially with, if you look at lots of different mountain ranges, they all have hints to people. Um, I mean, there's like the Sleeping Woman Mountains, I mean, the Grand Tetons. Um, there's the Three Sisters. I think that's really interesting that macro and micro, we find similar things. Like a curve of the body can mimic a curve of a mountain. Patterns in nature in small form mimic patterns in large form. Well, I actually studied printmaking in my undergrad. I studied the big four, so linoleum, um, silkscreen, lithography, and intaglio. And I really loved the practice. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was something that I definitely took a little bit of a break from for a couple years. Um, and then I decided that if I'm going to print make, nothing in the rule book says it has to be ink. And so I know that ink has a longevity that oil paint does not when you print it, but I liked that. I liked that there are aspects of it that were completely omitted or forgotten, so to speak. With memory, I thought it really hit what exactly what I was trying to say. Um, I'm really big into the number three. I use threes and triptychs a lot. I think, I think it comes down to a lot of different reasons. I always think about, um, and my Catholic roots, so the Holy Trinity. I have two sisters, so the three of us. It always comes around. It's a good number. It shows a sequence. It tells a narrative that I don't think you can get with just one piece. Yeah, so I mean, you think about like the game of telephone, when a message keeps getting skewed or distorted. A memory can work in a very similar way, especially if you think about a kid's story of when you go fishing and they say, it was this big, and the fish gets bigger and bigger with every story. Um, that you tend to remember things differently, that there's false memories, there's ways that people can influence your memory. And of course, just with time, things fade. And so I actually experimented a little bit with this one, trying to get the sequence of it fading to almost nothing, but also altering the information a little in the center where it doesn't exactly line up. It's not the exact same print because I wanted it to start to take on different life, like a retelling.
Cool. I love that idea. And now these are on, aren't they? These are on like plexiglass kind of, or
Acetate.
acetate. Okay, yeah. So how did
Yeah,
you
so
come
I
to that?
sandwiched them between some wood, and then I displayed them almost like a flagpole, I guess. I really wanted things to be viewed differently than just your static right on the wall. And just like, memories being told from different perspectives, I wanted the imagery to have that same reaction, that one side gives you a completely different story than the other.
Cool. And now was this in your senior show or your thesis show?
Yeah, this was in my senior thesis. Again, trying to get off of the wall, trying to change things up a little bit in how you display. Um, this one was suspended from the ceiling, as you can hopefully see. I tried to include a couple of detail shots of it. Um, probably the hardest thing was just making sure it was level because it was hanging from, about 40 feet up in the air. And I worked on the transparency paper, and I switched the image back and forth so that one side has the paint on it and then the other side doesn't, and then it has paint on it and then the other side doesn't. Again, just kind of changing the way you view it, um, and giving you different perspectives of the same thing.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Thank you.
And now, how did you do a few of these for the show, or?
Yeah, there was two. There
Okay.
was two. Yeah, so I kind of included that shot so you could kind of see both of them there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, they became these fake walls in the gallery that kind of broke up the space, um, without having to keep things on the perimeter. Again, these are just a couple more oil paintings. So I took really, really big piece of wood and I painted on it, painted a recognizable place from my memory, played with color a little bit, and then I printed it. I actually printed this one several times onto these large, large pieces of paper. These are 3 feet by 5 feet, I want to say. Um, and I printed them a couple of times, and then I decided to go with these two. I do have a couple more that I had considered displaying with it, but I felt that it was just necessary as a diptych. I actually used a little bit of mineral spirits to kind of thin the paint, um, to allow it some legs, so to speak, and then I held it up so that it got a little bit of gravity to it. these are all painted flat and then printed flat. So then I thought, if it's going to be displayed up, I wanted to give it some of that directional pull. These two are actually titled Allochthan Still and Allochthan Turbulent. Allochthan or allochthony is a displacement from apparent soil, and very technical term, but I thought it had a lot of meaning with, again, displacement of your home, displacement of what's familiar, the idea of memory, putting us in different locations, pushing that same idea, playing a little bit more with some other colors. Again, these are on like small blocks of wood that I would paint. And what I love most about it is what was going to show was not decided by me. It was more of a chance of fate of what part was going to show, what details were going to stick. I think it kind of hits on that idea of memory, right? You don't always get to control what you remember, or how much, or what specific part, or why you remember something,
Totally.
or how you try to change your own ideas. And that's something I played with a little bit on this one. So these are actually, there's probably about 20 prints here. Even though it's displayed as a triptych, there are lots of layers of paint prints underneath they're kind of stacked, and I gave them a little bit of some breathing room in between. I wanted to talk about the idea of, again, that fading memory, but also that fabricated memory. And so after the print, I tried to recapture the image by going over it with some paint and some pen and some ink, and trying to decide what part of it I could remember most without being reminded. And just kind of building on what was already there rather than what I remembered or what I specifically saw, but what had been translated for me. And probably one of the most exciting things about this triptych and a couple of others like it is it created these really beautiful shadows on the wall that reflected the detail in the pattern and a little bit of the color. So you almost got extra with it.
Oh, I like that chain. That's really neat.
Yeah, these were some unresolved paint works that you try to squeeze in at the last possible minute, and trying to prepare for a thesis. I was trying to decide. First I had a fear that I didn't have enough stuff, and then I was like, oh, I have way too much. And it took a lot of narrowing down. And that one on the bottom center probably took me more time than anything else, and unfortunately it just fell short. But I plan to revisit that one at some point.
Do you have any kind of advice you want to give to young artists?
I think a big part is just to kind of have faith in yourself, and don't be afraid to take risks. We get into our headspace, and I think that is true of any practice, that we start off and we think every single thing we do is precious and perfect, and it has to be maintained a certain way. But those are the best times to really push yourself and think outside the box and try something new. Go back to some of your old ideas and your old assignments and figure out how you can improve upon them. Or, like I do a lot, is revisit imagery. If it works, there's a reason why, and play around with it.